welcome everyone. Also, hello to you people online. I'm going to have the pleasure to welcome you first. My name is Lisa Saez. I'm the project manager of Connecting Europe. Connecting Europe is a project hosted here at the European Policy Center, funded by Stiftung Mercator. We are a network of approximately 65 civil society organizations in more than 15 countries all over Europe. And what we aim to do is to transnationalize policy debates here in Brussels by connecting civil society organizations with policymakers in Brussels and also the other way around. And we're very happy today to have collaborated with our colleagues from Europe and the world who have made it very possible for us to set up this event. And thank you also to all of the speakers for agreeing to speak today and to be here with us. I'll keep it very short, so hand it over now to Amanda for the rest of the event.
So from my side, welcome to all of you who've joined us today in the room, despite the rain in Belgium, which is not a new phenomena, and also those who have joined online. Today's topic is not a new one. Ever since I started to work on Ukraine, which was back in the days of the Orange Revolution, which was quite a long time ago and also shows how old I am. This topic has been there at the top of the agenda, and Ukraine's fight against corruption has become a cornerstone of its democratic transformation and EU integration efforts. Now, I guess, as all of you know, as part of Ukraine's EU accession process, it always still makes me smile to hear that word in Ukraine linked together, accession process, because we waited so long to have it. Ukraine must demonstrate credible, irreversible progress in fighting corruption, including, and very importantly, high-level political corruption. Now, Ukraine's journey fighting corruption has been a long one, and there's been a lot of, let's say, turns and bumps on the road. This has been due to a number of reasons: political interference, judicial resistance, elite impunity, oligarch interference. But many things have changed over the years, many positive things. I mean, Ukraine and corruption is certainly not where it was, 10 years ago. And this is thanks in large part to Ukrainian civil society, which has been a driving force in pushing anti-corruption agenda forward and actually making these changes possible. And of course, this includes the development of the independent anti-corruption bodies, which was a major milestone. But of course, challenges still remain and have remained for many years. But I think what happened in July this year, when the Ukrainian government passed a law that would have significantly undermined the independence of NABU and SAPO, was the worst backtracking that we had seen for many, many years. And this is what basically triggered the large-scale protests. Ukrainians like to go to the street and protest, and it's a good thing that they do. So we know that under huge public pressure and pressure from Ukraine's partners, these changes were backtracked. But I think the questions still remain: why did this happen in the first place? What was the motivation of the president to sign this bill into law when it was very clear that it would undermine the independence of Ukraine's anti-corruption bodies, but also be an attack on the EU accession process, but generally on democratic change in Ukraine? It was a very controversial step, and of course it wasn't the only one that happened during that period. I mean, many of you may remember that the appointment of Alexander Zhernakov to the Bureau of the Economic Security was blocked for several weeks, even though he was independently nominated and cleared. So there's a lot of things that we have to discuss today. where do we go from here? And we have a really great panel of speakers to give us insights, both in the hall here, but online from Ukraine and elsewhere. I'm very sorry that you couldn't come with us, well, couldn't be with us here in person. So I am going to introduce them shortly. First of all, Yelena Drobotova, who's prosecutor of the 2nd Division of the Department for Procedural Guidance, Public Prosecution and Representation in the Court of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, we know SAPO. Mykhailo Zhernakov, Executive Director of DEJURE Foundation, which is a well-known civil society organization and has been extremely active on these issues. Olena Prokopenko, who's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund here in Brussels. Hello, Olena, it's great to have you with us again. Clemens Mueller, policy officer at DG ENEST in the European Commission. Nice to have you here as well. Clemens. Stanislav Lyachynskyy, who is the country director of Democracy Reporting International Ukraine, is with us from Kiev. Welcome to you, Stanislav. Great to have such a famous civil society here as well from you. And last but not least, Mattia, Nelles, CEO and founder of Deutsch-Ukrainisches Buro, who I'm sure is very, very familiar to many of you because he has been working on Ukraine probably even longer than I have, including on this issue. So welcome to you, Mattia. So I want to kick off the discussion by giving the floor to Yelena from SAPO. And my first question to you would be, I mean, given everything that's happened, how confident are you now in SAPO's legal and operational independence following this reversal in July? The floor is yours, Yelena.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. It is a great pleasure to be with you today. We are aware that this effort to deprive our independence was only the first one, but there are plans B and C and so on and so forth. And we are aware that the pressure won't deprive. It is important to mention that though they couldn't deprive us independence with one draft law, but ruling elites make their efforts to do it for giving amendments to dozens of other smaller laws. For example, nowadays in Verkhovna Rada there is a draft law number 13423, which effectively grants immunity to certain defense companies for crimes including corruption committed during the execution of defense contracts. And according to this draft law, starting such criminal cases become the exclusive power of the Prosecutor General. Another draft law which is in Verkhovna Rada right now is one that grants the security service and intelligence agencies officers and also persons cooperating with them immunity for crimes within pre-approved special tasks, providing no mechanism to control. And also it is worth mentioning that two detectives of NABU are still being detained, and we think that it is also an effort to pressure anti-corruption bodies. Yesterday, one more detective was noticed on suspicion, and we are aware that there are rulings of investigative judges for searches in dwellings of NABU detectives and prosecutors of SAPO, so we are aware that the pressure will continue. Still, we don't give up. We are willing, and we continue to investigate and prosecute criminal cases against top corruption. Though we understand that the Security Service of Ukraine is one of the state bodies which the President and the Verkhovna Rada uses to pressure on NABU and SAPO. Last week we noticed on suspicion the general of the State Security Service. So as you can see, we continue to do our work as effective as possible, and we are not afraid of pressure of the ruling elite.
Thank you very much, Yelena. I mean, to be honest, it's quite worrying to start off the discussion hearing the points that you have just made, that so many shenanigans are in the pipeline despite what happened and despite the response from the European Union and other partners at that time. I mean, maybe a follow-up question. I mean, first of all, what are the safeguards that you now have in place to prevent future political interference in SAPO's mandate and leadership? I mean, are there safeguards there? And if there are, what are they? Sorry. And how would you, I mean, do you think the response from Ukraine's partners in July was strong enough? I mean, what you have just basically told us would indicate to me that perhaps not. So do you think there needs to be a stronger response now?
We understand that our only ally inside the country is civil society, because only the pressure of civil society and the protest of people with cardboards were the signal to the President and the Verkhovna Rada that they are doing wrong. We also appreciate very much the support of the European Union and our international partners. But still, we think that signals from Europe should be more strong to show that the independence of anti-corruption bodies is the only guarantee in our path, in Ukraine's path to European Union, and that without independence of NABU, SAPO, and High Anti-Corruption Court, we cannot become a part of European Union and join you. So we appreciate your efforts, but we think that these signals should be a bit stronger.
Thank you very much, Yelena. I'm going to come back to you again a bit later, but I want to move on to Mykhailo. Now, welcome to you again. We know that you're a very strong voice in Ukraine civil society. I know you have a few slides that you also want to show, so perhaps my colleague can put those on the screen. But I want to start by asking you which parts of the anti-corruption system nowadays are the most vulnerable to their independence being rolled back, and what early warning signs should partners and the public be aware of? And to what degree is, I mean, Ukrainian society are very, I mean, they're very observant of corruption. So how alert are they? And I see I see the slides actually related to that and the support for the anti-corruption from society in Ukraine. I was going to ask how high it is, but I see the slides there.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. Sorry, I also have to start with an apology. I'll have to run a little bit sooner than the panel ends, because I also have to teach. My lecture starts in a little bit. But again, I'm honored to be here, and really hope this will contribute to the conversation. Before that, can we turn off the slides? I'll come back to them in a minute. Yeah, thanks. Because I want to start answering also your question, Amanda, and just generally, I want to talk about three things. One is open clusters, two is tough love, and three is international experts. And I think this all relates to what we're talking about. And with one, yes, it's hard to say which one is more vulnerable. We've seen the NABU SAPO story, but I've also seen the judiciary, the courts, which we are at DEJURE are sort of responsible for. This is our main focus. But also we see how courts act in the NABU cases, for example, how they help hold hostage the NABU detectives and attack the newly established bodies and so on. So I just want to stress how important that is to also not forget why we're talking, of course, about a very important issue of anti-corruption institutions. It is important to continue with the court reform and make it successful. So coming back to my three talking points, one plea or one suggestion or one idea which I think is paramount is to still work diligently on opening the clusters. We understand the political issues, but also we heard that now more than one country inside the EU is having doubts and maybe not to exactly punish Ukraine, but just to give the signal that, you know, the NABU SAPO story wasn't exactly right. Let's maybe hold horses, or as we say, don't push the horses on accession thing, which I do think is not a good idea. And it might sound counterintuitive, but despite all this, we still have to open the clusters as much as possible, especially the fundamental cluster, because we have to give the incentive for the government to move forward, to keep the momentum, so to say. But also, these things happen not because the government doesn't like Ukraine or doesn't love reforms of the EU or works against it. It happens because this infrastructure comes too close to their interests, some of them. And to counterbalance that, we have to give the carrot, we have to give a right incentive for the government to still pursue the EU integration path and still to make these reforms happen, because they have to show the people, you know, progress along the EU track, which is very important. We heard recently for the government. Otherwise, we just deprive them. We would take this carrot away, and we just leave them with the choice to, you know, to reestablish this uncomfortable thing, but to what end, to what extent politically. And of course, it gives rise to, you know, another aspect is a lack of progress gives rise to anti-EU and Eurosceptic sentiment inside Ukraine, because we already start hearing voices from some of the politicians. Oh, you know, what did EU ever done? They don't want you inside, you know, all this. Sometimes I'll try it, you know, Russian propaganda or things borderline with that. Sometimes, you know, just corrupt officials using this narrative. So we have to, in order to progress, we have to open the clusters as fast as possible. The second one, tough love. This should be counterbalanced. It shouldn't always be, you know, all be puppies and rainbows along our. It's not already, but I mean, it's not just the carrots, because this policy of not criticizing Ukraine, whatever happens, turned out to be very detrimental, as we're seeing, right? Because I remember Rome very vividly when we were there. Just 2 days before that, Amanda, you already mentioned Mr. Civinsky, right? The ESBU. The first failed attempt happened right before the start of the URC, of the conference in Rome. And then after that, after this bad event, we heard all the rosy and very, you know, optimistic and very reassuring messages from the very top EU officials and others that Ukraine is doing splendidly on reforms, you know, and such. And of course, then days after that, or next day, we had attack on Shabunin, on Kubrakov, we had attacks on NABU SAPO, and then we had the voting that deprived them of their independence. So obviously, it's not the right thing to not criticize Ukraine no matter what. Of course, we have to balance it. Of course, it doesn't have to be on any case, but it has to be the system gets to get feedback. And this way, this is the only way we have achieved reforms, while it also might sound counterintuitive. There's this thing of, it's hard enough on Ukraine, let's not make it harder by demanding this, hard reforms. But this is actually the way to help Ukraine. This is the right time and this is the right instrument to demand the necessary reforms. And the last one, of course, it's more on the technical side, but this is an absolutely critical part of this reform infrastructure, is the international experts in the commissions. And this is something that we hear increasingly, the critics' criticism. Oh, sorry. Can we now get to the slides? We had a very recent sociology that, to the previous point, to the tough love, because the government says often that, all these parts of the government, at least, this, external pressure, why are you demanding from us? Like, why are you sovereignty this, sovereignty that? We ask the people. And the people say very distinctively that, first of all, to deal with anti-corruption and the justice issues, the EU should set clear requirements. 75% agree, or at least rather agree. 3/4 exactly. Next slide, please. We asked, is the Ukrainian government capable of overcoming the problems of corruption and administration of justice without international partners? 65%, 66%, so 2/3 say probably not. And the next slide, please. Do you support pressure? And we had a discussion, should we use the word pressure? Because that might fend off sort of some of the... No, pressure. This is what, again, 43 plus 29, 73%, something like this. It is the answer to the question, do you support pressure from the international partners on the Ukrainian authorities to cleanse the justice system and combat corruption? So overwhelmingly, Ukrainian population thinks that this should be a policy, the policy towards reforms. And last but not least, the next slide, the international experts inside the commissions. And this is, by the way, the recipe that... let's look at the numbers first. Who should have the prevailing vote in the selection of the judges for judges and the judicial bodies? It's not for, it's either or. And again, 56% think that it should be international experts delegated by partner states, and below 30 think it should be representatives of Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian judiciary. So, I mean, it's almost 2 times that this number differs. And thank you for the slides. Coming back, and I'm finishing here to the topic of the international experts. This is something that is paramount for successful transformation of the anti-corruption and judicial institutions. 100% of all the successful bodies that were either rebooted or built after the Revolution of Dignity, when it comes to anti-corruption or judicial institutions, was with the help of the international experts in the selection commissions. And vice versa, the other way around. I mean, NABU, SAPO, Anti-Corruption Court, HQCJ, HCJ, we can there's dozens of them already, or at least more than 10 definitely. Now, all the not successful stories, they didn't have the international experts in them. So this is a clear correlation. This is, I don't like the silver bullet concept per se, but this is as close to that that we have. And of course, they should be here. They should stay until we have successfully reformed at least the vast majority of these imported institutions. Now they're phasing out from the imported institutions, such as the High Qualification Commission of Judges, which is absolutely paramount for the judicial reform. We have to reinstate them back. There's a position of the EU spokesperson on it, but unfortunately still no political will inside the parliament. It should happen. The law should be adopted. We should have the international experts as at least as long as we need to successfully build these judicial and anti-corruption bodies and keep their independence. Thank you so very much. And of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, now it's working. Thank you, Mykhailo, for this pretty comprehensive overview on many topics. I know you need to leave early. I would just have a couple of follow-up questions. I mean, first of all, regarding the international experts, I mean, I fully agree with your assessment. But what is it about the international experts that the government is so against? I mean, why do they not want these international experts engaged? And is there enough pressure from the side of the EU and other partners to actually, I don't like to use the word force, but that's basically what we're talking about here, to force them to accept? What has been the implication of the US? I mean, the US's decision to stop its engagement in Ukraine. I mean, in these areas, I mean, the US aid is obviously, but it's much more than that, because the US was playing a real role as well in expertise and supporting different programs and whatnot. And the last point is related to what you said about opening the cluster. I also agree with you. It's important to open this cluster as soon as possible to keep the momentum. But what would be the implications of if this doesn't happen, but the EU moves ahead with Moldova? I mean, there's plenty of chatter nowadays about them being decoupled. What would be the impact on Ukraine if that was to happen?
Very easy questions. Very simple. Thanks, Amanda. Very substantive ones, really. I try to be brief as much as possible. So the government doesn't want the international experts because they make everything too independent. As easy as this. But this is sort of the ultimate goal, isn't it? To build independent institutions. Sometimes we hear this rhetoric that, oh, let's try and phase them out. Let's see what happens, them not being there. We're already seeing what happens without the international experts. We don't have to make more experiments. If we now get the international experts out of the system, say with the High Qualification Commission of Judges, you know who substitutes them in the commission? The representatives of the bar, the prosecution, the Academy of Legal Sciences, and the Council of Judges. Neither of these four institutions had ever any successful attempt at reforming them. A little bit on the prosecution that was never successful on the rest of that, not SAPO, and not a single one on the rest. So this is exactly what it is, coming back to Yanukovych times, literally, in terms of the quality of the selection of judges. And let me remind you, we're now selecting almost 2,500 judges for decades to come. So this is how important that is, and this is what will happen if we now, of course, they shouldn't stay here forever. Nobody's advocating for it, but at least they should stay here. By the way, the Venice Commission points it out, until they have fulfilled their role. Obviously, they haven't yet, so they have to stay. Now the decoupling in Moldova, I hope this is not a viable scenario anymore, because that can't happen. From what I know, that was one of the reasons was the elections in Moldova. I hope they go well for all of us. But now, of course, as they're really nearing, it doesn't really make sense politically to do that. And from the latest that we heard, probably not the main scenario. But of course, that would be very bad news for Ukraine. So hopefully, will not happen. And let's forget about this. Let's concentrate on opening the clusters for both countries. And now sorry, what was the third one, Amanda?
I think I've forgotten. I think I've actually forgotten myself.
Okay.
I think that was the third one, actually, about the.
That was the third one. The second one. That's what's missing.
Yeah, I think I've got amnesia. If it comes back to me, I'll remind it. It's just completely gone out of my mind. Sorry about that. Huh?
Yeah,
okay.
Right back at
you. It was about the US. Sorry, the US.
Oh yes, thank you very much. Very detrimental, and this is a direct consequence. The attack on NABU SAPO, the attack on activists, the attacks on former government people who were pro-reform, that all are direct consequences of US not being there, because that was the international partner who was always very direct, who was always very sort of strict when it was needed. Now it's not there, bad cop as they're sometimes called. And now we just left, again, G7 and IMF also because of the shift in the US policy that made a huge impact on them as the partners who would promote reforms otherwise, more actively at least, and a wider range. And now we just left with the EU that is traditionally very, that's what it is. I mean, we love and hold dear and want to be a part of, but again, just the approach of being too positive, of not criticizing Ukraine no matter what. This all clearly is not enough to make reforms happen. Vice versa, it leads to things like the ones with NABU and SAPO. I'm not shifting blame, God forbid, but what enabled it was really this, policy of not criticizing Ukraine no matter what. I hope this stays in the past. I hope the new policy of really, directly communicating what the problems and the ways to solve them stays, because if we go back to what it was before, we'll be facing more and more and harder and harder challenges. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mykhailo. I'm now going to turn to our speakers in the room. I'm going to start with you, Olena. Could you sort of give us an overview of what scenarios we should be preparing for in the terms of future reform backsliding? And are the partners prepared for this? I mean, are they doing enough to prevent it in the first place? I mean, has the message been put clearly enough across in July that you can't do this and there's going to be serious consequences? But are they already preparing for something to happen along the same lines?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you, European Policy Center, for hosting this important conversation. I'd like to start out by reiterating that, unfortunately, the latest crackdown on anti-corruption agencies, as blatant as it was, with all the scale that we've seen, none of it is new, unfortunately. And those of us who worked in the civil society since the Revolution of Dignity, or those who worked with the civil society from the outside, could probably attest to that. Ever since the concept of NABU and SAPO was developed by civil society organizations, the government tried to kill it. Just when civil society got the EU on board with the idea of creating an independent high anti-corruption court, former President Poroshenko convinced the EU leadership that it was enough to create anti-corruption chambers in the deeply corrupt existing courts, and it took civil society months and months of advocacy in Brussels to reverse that. Ever since the Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies have been in place, political leadership has been trying to dismantle them or to curb their independence, and they used all kinds of tools and tactics to do that. They did it through legislative amendments, through political pressure, through smear campaigns. They tried to overload these agencies with the minor cases to strip them of the capacity to deal with the grant corruption and so on. So I think it's safe to say that there hardly has been the time when anti-corruption institutions could operate in the uninterrupted manner. And being mindful of this history, I think, helps to make peace with the fact that these attacks will continue, that this is not a bug, it's a feature. And in fact, the closer we get to possible elections, the moment elections are back on the agenda, these attacks will likely intensify. So when we're discussing, Amanda, what the EU can do, what international partners can do if the reform backsliding happens again, for me, it's not an if question, it's a when question. And the answer to that when question is now. I think we can all agree that the moment that the scandalous legislation on NABU and SAPO was reversed in late July, we saw new bills emerging in the parliament aiming to reboot NABU and SAPO governance bodies. We saw a new smear campaign against the two directors of NABU and SAPO. We saw new criminal investigations against NABU detectives and so on. So the new attacks are not yet to come. They have already started, and they started virtually immediately after the attacks were reversed, even though all eyes were still on this case. The whole world was still watching, and the attacks already resumed. However, they did become more subtle, they did become more nuanced, and they are much more difficult to monitor. And this is why they're even more dangerous now, and we should be even more vigilant. And when it comes to legislative attempts to undermine anti-corruption agencies, as confirmed by our partners in Ukraine, there are no mechanisms at the moment to protect these agencies from these legislative attacks. With a simple majority of 226 votes, which is a fairly easy number for the ruling party to mobilize, any harmful legislation is still possible. This makes international partners and civil society the only two lines of defense that NABU and SAPO have. And then the question becomes how to support reform actors, reform efforts, without playing into the hands of Ukraine's foes who are waiting for the reasons to claim that Ukraine is failing on the democratic path. And this is the dilemma that I have been personally facing when I was working in the civil society in Ukraine. And I know that for many reformers, it's a tough spot to be in, because we all understand that Ukraine is fighting for its existence. It needs all the international support it can get, and any negative publicity, yet another corruption scandal is putting that at risk. But I think this is where we need more bilateral, informal, non-public dialogue between international partners and Ukrainian leadership. And all the necessary pressure, I believe, can be put on ruling elites without excessive publicity. It is also critical that Western partners stay in close touch with democratic actors, with the reformers who can keep them closely informed on any worrying developments as early as possible. And according to the information I have, civil society actors have been informing and warning international partners about this upcoming crackdown weeks before it happened. And it doesn't sound like they have been heard at all. But even though this attack on NABU and SAPO has become incredibly public, including in the West, it's important to convey to Western audiences that this attack is by no means a reflection on the state of Ukrainian democracy. In fact, the state of Ukrainian democracy, the resilience of the Ukrainian democracy has been demonstrated in the streets of Kyiv and other cities by democratic actors who protested against President Zelensky's initiative. And it was demonstrated by the fact that NABU and SAPO are, in fact, effective, and remaining vested interests in Ukraine are rightly feeling at risk. They rightly feel threatened. And this reversal of the scandalous legislation on NABU and SAPO is a testimony to an incredibly high demand for justice and anti-corruption efforts in the Ukrainian society, because Ukrainians sacrifice so much on a daily basis in this war. And when we look at the findings of many recent polls, including the latest one by Transparency International Ukraine, we see that corruption as a problem is seen by Ukrainians as highly, on the same level as war itself, as a destruction that is caused by the war. This is how important anti-corruption efforts are. So the fact that the government is unfortunately making those backsliding attempts does not reflect the high demand in the Ukrainian society for anti-corruption efforts. Now, when it comes to EU-US coordination on this front, there's of course an urgent need to restore consistent funding of anti-corruption actors, organizations, and other democratic institutions. Civil society has, of course, been a key driver of the reform process and the main architect of the anti-corruption infrastructure. And today it's struggling. It's struggling because it's under continued pressure from the government, along with independent media, along with political opposition, and it needs international partners to protect it from this pressure. Civil society also needs to be more integrated in the donor coordination efforts, and Ukraine Donor Platform, I believe, should have a civil society advisory board, which it doesn't have at the moment, and we at GMF are advocating for this, and civil society voice would be very critical in in this process. Also, as we know, and as Mykhailo already commented on, dismantling of USAID caused a major funding crisis among CSOs, and they are distracting so many of their efforts on fundraising, and this is what makes them more vulnerable. This is what doesn't let them monitor all the corruption instances as broadly, as deeply as they would like to, and this crisis has not been resolved, and it's far from being resolved. So European partners and other Western allies should step in as soon as possible, because the moment when anti-corruption organizations start losing their teams, I think it will be very, very difficult to bring them back up. If the funding is restored and resumed in the coming months, it will be very difficult to restore that capacity for when it's most needed. And we see some efforts in that direction by the European Commission and by member states, but I would argue that these efforts are far from reflecting the urgency of the situation we're in. And the last point I wanted to make is something that we at GMF keep hearing from our partners in the parliament and the civil society, and this was alluded to in this conversation before. Reform conditionalities need to be utilized much more broadly. They're not utilized enough, and they're still one of the most powerful tools to boost reform progress. There is no way civil society would have been able to ensure reform progress that Ukraine has achieved since 2014 without coordination with international partners through the mechanism of conditionalities, which in case of many reforms have really been miracle makers. And let's hope that it won't take a miracle to save Ukraine's democratic actors, but conditionalities are an unexplored source of hope and the tool that should be utilized much more broadly, particularly in the context of EU accession. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olena. I fully agree with you on the issue of conditionalities. As you rightly said, back in 2014 and thereafter, for the association agreement in DCFTA, they played a really important role. Maybe just a couple of follow-ups, because you mentioned about the dialogue between the government and the EU. I mean, would it be advisable, for example, every time somebody from the EU, I mean, bilaterally or high level, has a meeting with somebody from the OPU or the government, that they would actually bring up the issue of reform? I'm not sure that's the case at the moment, because obviously there's a very high and important security agenda. But every time they have the opportunity to raise the issue of reform or backsliding, the things that need to be done, they should be taken seriously, whether it's with, Chancellor Merz or Macron or Keir Starmer or whatnot. And a second point, I think having a regular dialogue between Ukraine's government and civil society is important, and I think it's something they're supposed to actually do, including with the office of the president, because Ukraine's decisions are more or less taken there. Is this something that happens, or does it not happen enough? And how important would this be, that basically civil society sits at the table with Andriy Yermak or somebody else, even with President Zelensky, and basically puts across their concerns, their insights and whatnot?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Well, I completely agree that reform issues, reform agendas should be brought up in every high-level meeting between Ukrainian leadership and international leaders, foreign leaders. And ultimately, the effectiveness of Ukraine's reforms is something that impacts Ukraine's defense effort, Ukraine's defense capabilities in very direct ways. And this is ultimately what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the democratic, free, independent country where democratic actors are respected, where they can work uninterruptedly, where corruption has zero tolerance. And that's why I do agree that no high-level meeting that's focused on defense and security assistance should be limited to that only. I think reform backsliding attempts and reform priorities should always be part of that discussion. And the more this is brought up, the more sources, the more actors bring this up and put pressure on the Ukrainian government from all sides, the better chances we have at succeeding in these advocacy attempts, advocacy efforts. And as to civil society at the table, of course, I'm biased here because I worked in civil society. I work with civil society now. So I mean, I couldn't agree more that any reform that was attempted to be implemented without civil society in Ukraine failed, and it will fail again if the government or international partners try to advocate for democratic changes or reforms that civil society wouldn't be on board with. That's why, as I said in my earlier remarks, civil society should be more integrated in all important fora, in all important platforms, including Ukraine donor platform, including the format of coordination with the Ukrainian government. And unfortunately, when we look at the frequency of meetings between Ukrainian government and civil society, it has been on the decline soon after this government was elected, and this is very unfortunate because it's a wasted resource, it's a wasted opportunity to source very high level expertise that civil society can offer. And this is a reflection of the lack of interest in many of the government authorities in integrating civil society. In many ways, I can say that it depends with less lucrative reforms, with less conflictual reforms, I mean, less than anti-corruption, less than rule of law, we can see some coordination on the level of Ukrainian government and civil society. But when it comes to high stakes reforms, this coordination has long been gone, and now it's only international partners that can empower civil society to make a difference there. So yes, please, more civil society at the table more often in every fora we can think of.
Thank you so much, Olena. I now want to come to you, Clemens, because I think this follows on quite well. What lessons do you think have been learned from the side of the EU since July? Since the July shenanigans, and why did it take so long, basically, to react? Because for many of us, it was very clear that something bad was happening. And as Mykhailo mentioned, I mean, I was also in that meeting in Rome, and it was very strange that there was no mention of any of these issues during the whole Ukraine recovery conference. So what lessons have been learned, and how do you see, I mean, how is the EU recalibrating its approach towards the pushing for the reform in Ukraine? Has there been a significant change since then? I'm sorry to put you on the spot with those questions, because I know it's not that easy, but I think we do need to address them.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda, and colleagues from the EPC for organizing this event. I think it's indeed very, very good to come together and discuss this. And also thanks, obviously, for the colleagues being online and Olena being here. Well, maybe let's start a little bit to focus first on the process and the whole reversal backsliding issue, and then maybe also some sort of general remarks. I think it's important to stress that, at least from the Commission side, we have already assessed that the fundamental cluster is ready to be opened. We have communicated this to the Council clearly. And it's obviously the prerogative of the member states and the Council to take the formal decision concerning the opening of the fundamental cluster, as it is set out in the negotiating framework. And so the negotiating framework is also pretty clear. The opening benchmarks for opening the fundamental cluster are the adoption of the roadmaps in relation to rule of law, functioning democratic institutions. And from the Commission side, I think the Council has now all the elements in its hand to decide on the next steps. And obviously, we're working closely with the Council and trying to achieve the opening of the cluster. So that goes very much into what Mykhailo has said. What are sort of the next steps that could be taken to further strengthen NABU and SAPO? Why? Because then indeed, I think the leverage will be higher, the incentive will be higher to implement the reforms that are detailed in the rule of law roadmap. And several of these elements clearly point out to further strengthening NABU and SAPO. And when NABU and SAPO were actually here in Brussels a couple of weeks ago to also have an in-depth discussion and meeting with our Commissioner Kos, but also with the EU member states, they pointed out to the EU member states when asked, how can we help you further? The NABU and SAPO leadership said, open cluster 1 and bring the rule of law map fully into play. So I think this is sort of important to stress where we stand in terms of process in the accession negotiations, although that might sound very technical, but eventually it really comes down to sort of, how to advance the reforms, how to strengthen further the institutions and the independency. Now, on the reversal / backsliding, I think, of course, reversal is a bit ambiguous. You can say there was a reform reversal, or there was also a reversal of the contested law with the adoption of the next law. So if reversal sort of refers to backsliding, I mean, strictly speaking, there was no backsliding, or there was a backsliding for 10 days until the critical law was reversed through the presidential sponsored draft law. And according to our information, and also NABU and SAPO confirmed that in conversations, these amendments were not applied during these 10 days. So strictly speaking, if you look at the legislative framework and the independency of the institutions, there is no backsliding. But obviously, there's an attempt to backslide. And I think the EU has been very openly and very critical about the adoption of the law. In fact, I think it was Commissioner Kos who was among the first ones who issued a tweet criticizing the adoption of the law. I think we were also among the first ones who made this clear in bilateral discussions at the top level, the Ukrainian leadership, that this adoption of the law clearly goes detriment to basically all the reforms we have been working on, and Ukraine has been successfully implemented post-Maidan. That was also conditioned as part of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan, macro-financial assistance. I think the independence, or the establishment of the anti-corruption institutions and the independence of those institutions has been always sort of on the forefront, has been always the core of all these programs. So I think rather than now looking at this from a perspective of a backsliding, I think one should rather look at this at the matter of trust. So for me, the adoption of the law casts greater doubts on Ukraine's willingness to fight high-level corruption. And how do you deal with this doubt? So that's sort of possibly the question here. And here I'm rather critical, considering the context and sort of the concerted approach of the, well, as we hear, still ongoing attack on NABU and SAPO. Of course, it's my job to be critical, but I think, looking into how it has cast doubt on trust and what needs to be done to restore the trust is what we should look at it. And here also again, despite all the criticism we have heard, I think there were clear public communication to the Ukrainian government and the leadership for immediate trust building measures. And the newly appointed government has taken some of these trust building measures that were publicly communicated. The appointment of the head of the Bureau of Economic Security, the start of or the appointment of the selection commission for selecting a new head of the customs service, appointment of a member of HQCJ, and so on. Of course, there are other trust building measures that I think need to be taken. But first steps were taken. Yes, if you look at it with an objective observer point, then you can say, well, eventually those measures that were taken were measures that were, or obstacles that were put in place for probably no good reason by the Ukrainian actors in the first place. And certainly they're not reforms as such, but eventually having a new head of ESBU and having the selection process and eventually a new head of customs service might lead to reforms. So it opens up the way for reforms, but there are no reforms as such. I think it's also important to stress. So on that issue, I mean, as you know, the enlargement report, the annual enlargement package will be forthcoming in autumn. I think we will have to reflect on that. Inter-service consultations are ongoing, and I don't want to prejudice those, obviously. Now, maybe briefly also some general observations on these events. Some maybe main takeaways. Again, in the framework of what does it mean actually in terms of trust, in terms of how genuine is the readiness to fight high-level corruption in Ukraine. I think first point to stress, NABU remains highly effective and strongly stepped up its investigations and prosecutions of high-level corruption cases. I don't want to say that this was part of the trigger. I leave that to everyone to observe and assess it themselves. But obviously, everyone knows about the high-level investigations that NABU has conducted over the last 6 to 10 months, including the Deputy Prime Minister, including former members of the President's office, including the head of the accounting chamber, including senior staff at the Security Service of Ukraine. So the experience backslash in that sense is actually a positive sign because it shows NABU is impactful and effective, because otherwise, why to bother in attacking the institution? Then I think another observation is that the attack on NABU was concerted and most likely steered from higher levels. Why? Because to develop such legislative amendments takes a bit of time to prepare. I think it took more time to prepare than actually to adopt them in full in the Rada. And then also the same for the searches, the joint searches of the law enforcement agencies and NABU detectives. That was also quite concerted, so that also takes time to prepare. So I'm saying it was not an immediate reaction to something, but it required quite some thinking and some planning. Now, and I think it goes, Olena has pointed that as well, has pointed this out already, civil society and the fact there were demonstrations and demonstrators effectively standing up for the independence of NABU and SAPO is a clear sign of democracy in action. And actually it shows that key fundamental rights can be freely exercised in Ukraine, also during martial law. So I think it's important to stress that this is really also a positive development. Now, something I find quite underreported or not so much reflected is actually the role of the Verkhovna Rada. And certainly you have pointed out it is weakened. It has difficulty sometimes to implement its mandate. We see that quite often when it comes to reforms. Also last week, I think one of the Ukraine facility related draft laws that we hoped that the Rada would pass was, I think, short of 20 votes. But then also the issue of an adoption and immediate revocation of the law, again, casts certain doubts. Yeah? I don't want to go so far to say on its autonomy and which interests they actually represent, but I think it merits a further, more comprehensive discussion about the role of the Rada in that. Then 2 more points, or maybe 3. NABU and the SSU interagency standoff seems to continue. And I see a clear risk here that if it continues in that format, NABU might not survive as an independent institution. So I think everyone should be aware of that. I think we're closely monitoring this, and we'll also certainly address this. And the role of the National Agency for Corruption Prevention. To my best knowledge, they didn't actually publicly stand up to support NABU and SAPO publicly. Despite its Civic Oversight Council actually demanding that. So that also casts certain doubts. From what I hear among some of the Ukrainian reformers, they perceive the reputation of NACP increasingly negative, triggered by that. So again, I think something that might merit further discussions. And then I think it goes. I concur with everyone. What the previous speakers have said. These attacks are likely to continue on the anti-corruption institutions as long as they continue to effectively deliver against their mandate. But I think most likely these attacks will be more sophisticated. Yes, there will be legislative amendments, but more, I think what Yelena has pointed out, which we're obviously also observing, but not a full-on attempt. I think it will be more sort of the approach of subtle attacks, trying to weaken out the institutions over time. I think, we all know the boiling frog theory. I think the frog jumped out in July, and now the heat is turned up, increasingly, but not in full at once. So those, I leave it here. Some sort of, let's say, reflections from my side, also pointing out to the process that is in place. Yes, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Clemens. I think this was also a great overview, and you flagged many important points that I'm sure we're going to be able to pick up in the discussion. We have two more speakers, and then we're going to take questions from the floor. I want to come back to online now, to Stanislav, because we've talked a lot about sort of Kiev-centric civil society role, but I want to ask you to address how regional and local watchdog networks can be better connected to national reform processes.
Thank you, dear Amanda. Dear colleagues, thank you for inviting me. I am Stanislav Lyachynskyy, Country Director for Ukraine at Democracy Reporting International, and we are doing a lot of work and research on how Ukrainian democracy performs during the wartime. For instance, we have produced an annual assessment report on functioning of Ukrainian democratic institutions, including parliament, judiciary, and executive branches, as well as overview of situation with human rights and media. And basically, what should I say, that the July events, as we call them, they have highlighted both resilience of Ukrainian democracy and its vulnerability during the wartime. The protests, thank you, dear colleagues, have highlighted basically the previous panelists. They have highlighted basically most of key essential points of which it is worth to mention. But I would like to stress before we go directly to Amanda's question, I would like to highlight that yes, the main point of the protests was protection of independence of anti-corruption institutions. But the reasons behind that have driven those people to the streets were actually quite different, according to some surveys, including those made by Vox Ukraine, for example. So NABU was primary reason, but not the only one. Another one were a demonstration of solidarity and protection of Ukraine's European future. So the protests were about the future, and they were basically youth-driven, because about 40% of the protesters in Kiev, according to on-site poll, were under 25 years old. So the vast majority of protesters were under 35 years old. And some most recent poll suggests that younger generation demonstrates more adherence to the democratic values too. For example, more young people prefer democracy over strong leader than older generations. So it's about youth, it's about their aspirations, and it's about their future, because it's about more than just protecting the institutions and their independence. That's where those in government who orchestrated this campaign, they have gravely miscalculated, because it was not just about some legislative changes. It was about Ukrainian Europeans' path. Then actually, it's not very easy question about connecting regional and national networks, especially as Ukraine is in its 4 years of a full-scale war. Of course, Ukrainian civil society now faces first. To connect, you need to have more resources, and unfortunately we don't have more resources after the USAID departure, because many resources were channeled into those specific collaboration and networking between regional and national stakeholders. So the question number one is of course more resources here. Then there are some I would say problems we do not control, because during the war, with air raid alerts and reduced mobility inside the country, for some reasons it's not what I'm because I do travel much across the country, and I feel that people are and even activists are increasingly isolated. Their agenda is becoming more locally driven. People just travel less for business from one city to another. So that's just physically. And of course, more networking events perhaps are needed, more experience exchange, of course, online online forums and formats, just like connecting the different groups across Ukraine. It all may work. So that's basically will be my response. I could elaborate more if need be. And the last not least thing, well, I should have started from this. So safeguarding institutions requires attention to independent media, especially to the country's public broadcaster. Because if we see how the protests were covered in July by those channels who are within this national United News Teleton, which is still operational, and I would say does not have much of trust from people, from Ukrainians, but Suspilne, the public broadcaster, which managed to maintain its independence, it has provided extensive and balanced coverage of the protests. And of course, it is underfunded, but it has its limitation. But questions of resources for Suspilne, for public broadcaster, should also not be front and center, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stanislav, and thank you actually for flagging this this last point on Suspilne as being a more independent news broadcaster, because I think it's important. So now I want to move to our last speaker, last but not least, to you, Mattia, for a couple of questions. It was mentioned earlier that there is a lack of willingness to fight high-level corruption. Maybe it's a silly question, but why do you think this is? I mean, what's at the roots of what remains at the roots of this? And secondly, what do you think an early warning system? I mean, how can it be designed, this system, to detect renewed efforts against anti-corruption bodies? I mean, it pains me to say that we need such an early warning system, because I would hope lessons had been learned, but clearly some lessons haven't been learned. You have many years experience working on Ukraine, so how would you see that sort of early warning system shaping up?
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for the EPC for having me, and it's a pleasure to be among these distinguished friends and colleagues here. So let me begin with a broader point on the lack of willingness then. We've heard that the anti-corruption infrastructure that was created after the Revolution of Dignity, after 2014, is under attack. And this is really the starting point. You know, whatever you want to call the salami tactic, boiling frog theory, the death of the thousand cuts, the three central institutions are under continuous attack. This is really the starting point. And when we, and even the High Anti-Corruption Court, which has been mentioned, and Mykhailo covered the judiciary, but they recently came out publicly, the head of the High Anti-Corruption Court, and said, we are feeling sustained political campaign against us to discredit us, and this has impact on our work. So this is really the starting point. Why are these institutions under attack, or why is there, again, some of it has been answered, but why is there the willingness or lack of willingness for combating the top-level corruption? I would say, first of all, the institutions show a remarkable, and this is Clemens Mueller made this point, NABU, SAPO, and the Hague, but the investigation, the prosecution, the law enforcement, and the prosecution side, and also the court side, they show a remarkable willingness to combat the top-level corruption, which is their mandate. So the NABUs and NABU, SAPO, and Hague. But the question is, are they being led to do that? So, and for the first time, you know, after the appointment of Mr. Klemenko and then Krivonos, we have seen an increased level of activity, and that I want to highlight at this point. So it's not about the institutions' willingness, it's about the political context around them that is the problem. Really, a lot of the top-level cases were mentioned, but the shots were coming closer to the core of the presidential team, maybe not to the president himself, but we the first sitting member of the cabinet of Zelensky that was handed a suspicion in the past 6 years, Mr. Chernyshev, who's a close family friend of Mr. Zelensky and of Mr. Yermak. That's just the embodiment of the work, of the good work that NABU, SAPO are doing. They're delivering on this promise of the Revolution of Dignity that no one is above the law. And the question is now, the political context, are they being led? And here we see, unfortunately, an understanding, and this is not new, this we've seen since 2019, way before the full-scale invasion, the approach of Zelensky and his team when it comes to institutions, independent institutions. It's about political control, having a political control over various institutions, disregarding the constitution. You know, the parliament was mentioned. It was basically a function, a continued a tool of the president. And with the recent attacks, I would even go as far as saying the parliament is a huge problem. And what hasn't been mentioned is the ongoing work of the parliament's investigative committee, gathering dirt, and some of the draft laws Yelena has mentioned, there are others. So we have really, and this connects to the early warning, we have to continuously watch that. But the point here is that we are coming out of the hole that the president's, or the draft law stripping NABU and SAPO's independence that was revoked, but the same law strengthened, for instance, the general prosecutor. So, and my bottom line is here that the president keeps empowering institutions, unreformed institutions like the General Prosecutor's Office, and they are part of the structural pressures on the anti-corruption institutions. So as long as we don't see reforms, sensible reforms with the General Prosecutor's Office, and this is a key component of Ukraine's EU accession, the depoliticization of this post and the professionalization of that post, that's a center point. And we had heard demands of a proper appointment process, and instead we saw rushing through a political appointment of the current prosecutor, whose main task it was to dismember NABU and SAPO's independence. So that they are now switching to plan B and C. Now, regarding the warning system, so I would say that to answer the first, summarizing what I tried to say is the point that the structural reasons for the attacks remain. As the SBU has had a huge impact on NABU, SAPO, and continues to have a large impact in deterring even NABU detectives or even future applicants. They have to think twice whether they want to prosecute people, because the targeted approach against the leading detectives in charge of sensitive cases. This is really the SBU is dedicating a lot of resources to go after the NABU and SAPO, and this is what we have to bear in mind. Now, early warning. We're talking about an early warning. NABU SAPO has an early warning. NABU has an excellent analytical department. What they're doing, and some of us are doing the same. We're doing proper media monitoring to kind of see the slander that is coming their way. And that has been a continuous feature of the NABU, SAPO, and HAC ever since they existed. But we could literally measure before the SBU and then the legislative attack, a significant uptick in this. And the NABU and SAPO directors made this point in Paris, Brussels, and also Berlin. We've seen a yearly amount of slander in the few weeks preceding the attacks. So you can measure that, you can track it to certain accounts, some of them directly managed by Yermak and others. So this is really where we need a proper monitoring tool. Some of us have that. The question is only how we exchange that information. But NABU was going to the G7 partners warning about this before it has happened. So certain components of the warning systems are there. And the proper legislative monitoring, I think, is center. We've mentioned some of the draft laws, but there are several. I can see 5 to 6 that are hugely problematic, and I will not go into them. And the NGOs covering them as watchdogs, they are being attacked, and their capacity to flag those, like ANTAC, is reduced because of the funding decreasing, but also the attack against them. Because we see continuous attack, not just against ANTAC or Shabunin, and that takes resources away of their capacity to monitor that. They're doing continuous analysis, but the question is, how is the analysis fed into the G7 ambassadors round in the EU circles? So I see and read a lot of their analysis, as we all do, but the question is, how serious is that taken? Regarding, maybe lastly, I talked a lot, what the deterrence question for me is remarkable. Like, haven't they heard, I was asked a lot, haven't they heard the shots? Like, why, what lessons have been learned by Yermak and the Bankova boys, as I like to refer to them? And the unfortunate answer is little, even if the government has, and the government is remarkably sensitive to its huge funding needs vis-a-vis international financial institutions. But the signals we are looking at, there's not just remorse is an ethical question, but the question of accountability from the president's office. I see very little of that. So the question of deterrence, yes, Clemens is absolutely right. The approach of money now and reforms a little bit later has changed, but I see so far, and that's really where I want to end, little understanding of the damage of trust that has been done from the president's office. Maybe the government less, the prime minister is different, it's a new government, but my understanding is that the key people deciding over policy, largely not the cabinet, unfortunately, but the kind of political decisions, they haven't heard the shots. So we need to continuously remind them that this has negative effects on Ukraine's EU accession. And even though we want to open the clusters, we have to continuously remind them. And this is the question how, and a lot of colleagues have given good contributions to that. But I'll stop here and open for any kind of questions.
Thank you very much, Mattia. I'm now going to open the floor to questions, both in the room and online, because we also have an online audience. If you have a question, can you please raise your hand, your name, tell us where you're from, and who you would like the question to go to. Deadly silence. Is there anybody online who has a question? I think that's the first time I've ever been in a room where we've had that question, where we've had that situation on Ukraine. Okay, so maybe I can come back to, oh, then 2 hands pop up. I made you feel guilty. Okay, so the lady at the back, if you can just say who you are.
It was a guilt part a bit. My name is Lyudmila Palomor. I'm from Connecta Consulting. It's a Ukrainian consulting firm helping Ukrainian civil society and SMEs with international cooperation and understanding EU accession. And my question is probably to Clemens about something that both Olena and Stanislav mentioned earlier in terms of lack of resources or the gap that was created by the USAID unfortunate departure, what it caused already for the civil society organizations and their capacity, and what it might cause in the future if the situation does not change. Do you hear those conversations? Because in Ukraine, we hear them a lot, almost every day, that it is a problem. Do you hear those conversations echoed in the corridors of DG ENEST or Commission more broadly? Is there a discussion, for example, about the replenishment of some of the, of course, not replacing the USAID to the full extent, but some immediate measures to support civil society organizations working on anti-corruption, especially in the view of what happened in July?
I think we had a second question at the front. We take them together.
Hi, William from the Danish Perm Rep. So we're presidency these days and actually sit in the Quella working party that deals with all the clusters. So thank you for all the interest. I think I have a comment and a question. I mean, the first comment is more of a reassurance to what was mentioned from Kim earlier, that there's some hesitation to open the cluster because of what happened in July. Just to reassure you that on the part of the presidency, and I think the vast majority of member states, there's no such contradictions. You could actually argue it's the other way around, that shining a strong and unforgiving light on corruption issues is a precondition for continuing with the enlargement process. So we see no contradiction between that, and many of us would like to open the cluster, but we know it's a unanimous process. We don't have unanimity, so we do the technical work. We'll get an update tomorrow on what happens. We'll had the NABU SAPO event a couple of weeks ago, and we will have another one, a bigger one in October on that same issue. So shining an unforgiving light, but not as a contradiction or something that impedes the accession process, which we want to continue at full speed. I just wonder, maybe to Olena, a question about, let's say, the perspective of what happens on, because we know this has been going on for ages. I started working on in 2017, and we have seen, and we will see, as you also mentioned, that this is this is part of the game, because the problem is so huge. This is not something you can fix in an afternoon, and the resistance from the system will continue. I just wonder if you could give us a bit of perspective on time-wise on where we are, because I think what we heard from NABU SAPO when they were here, they said, we are making progress. So there are lots of problems, lots of challenges. It always has been. It will continue. I think we can, I think we just need a bit of perspective, not to diminish the own goal that happened in July, not to diminish the importance of that, but I think a bit of perspective where we are, seeing a bit from above, I think that would be useful. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to you, Clemens, and then to Olena.
Yeah, thank you. Happily we'll answer this question in relation to civil society and potential lack of funding. So I think the change of the donor landscape, as we would call it, with the departure of a termination of USAID, obviously this is something that is closely followed in the Commission. We conducted a full-fledged mapping, not only in relation to Ukraine, our impact on Ukraine and civil society working there, but also more globally. And indeed, I mean, we have identified priorities where we think it's doable, and also of a priority, a strategic priority to fill the gap that was caused. But obviously, and as you already has pointed out yourself, we will not be able to cover everything. And I think we also shouldn't, because that would send the wrong political signal, possibly, if there's immediately a donor that can cover all the gaps that USAID has left. So yes, fully aware of the issue, fully taking into account this changing landscape. And yes, also recalibrating following the July events in relation to CSO supports, but also more broadly support to NABU and SAPO. That's not only true for the Commission, but also for EU member states, at least to the extent I can observe that.
Olena.
Yeah, thank you, William, for your comment, and thank you so much for everything that Denmark is doing to support Ukraine on its EU accession path. And it was very encouraging to hear from you that there is no contradiction between, the events we've seen and the willingness to open fundamentals clusters. So let's hope that the political consensus is also achieved very soon. As to the perspective on the progress that has been made, of course, the establishment of the anti-corruption institutions and the fact that they have survived all these years is already a huge step and an incredible achievement. I would say that progress has been made both on the prevention of the corruption front, in the sense that many loopholes have been closed. At the same time, we have seen progress on the prosecution. We have seen convictions that have been important for the society to see, to be able to appreciate the importance of these institutions. Because for the expert community, the establishment of institutions is an important benchmark. But for the society at large, they want to see corrupt officials in jail. They want to see more radical measures. So the fact that these convictions are taking place is, of course, a very important trust building sign. I would also point out the difference between the corruption level itself and the perception of corruption. And as partners in Ukraine keep pointing out, because of all the corruption scandals, because of all the publicity around cases like the July case, and because of the Russian propaganda and disinformation in Ukraine, it feels like corruption is everywhere. It feels like it's pervasive and overwhelming. But if we look at the statistics of the actual contact with corruption cases, of actual experience that Ukrainians have with corruption, it has gone down to 17% as compared to 70% in the recent years. So although the perception is still very high, the actual experience is a lot more contained and localized, which is not something that we should consider a good enough result, but at least it's more than we had achieved in the previous decades so far. But I would say that it's very early, too early for international partners and civil society to lower their guard. I think we should be ready again for ongoing attempts to undermine the legitimacy of institutions and to undermine efforts on prevention of corruption. So although progress has been made, we need to prepare for many more years of fight to not only achieve new results and to see new milestones, but even to retain what we have, to protect the achievements of the Maidan, to protect anti-corruption reforms that have been made. Civil society actors that we talk to point out that under the current government, before the elections can take place, there doesn't seem to be any room for further reform, but the program minimum, or the plan B that we should focus on, is to not let the achievements that have been made slide back. So probably nothing groundbreaking will happen on the anti-corruption front going forward that we could consider significant steps forward. But let's make sure that we join our efforts to retain the impressive achievements that Ukraine has made. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Olena. We just have a couple of minutes left, but I would like to ask our online speakers if they could very quickly, in one sentence, say what they would like from the partners to do immediately to support this anti-corruption agenda. If there was one thing they could do tomorrow, what would it be? I'll start with you, Yelena, please.
if I can ask only one thing from our European partners, I would ask to help us with extradition issues, because all our efforts on combating corruption are useless when we cannot extradite a person from abroad.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Stanislav?
I will repeat some of the speakers and will ask our partners at large to open fundamentals cluster, because because this will give institutional incentive to Ukrainian government and some inspiration and hope to Ukrainian people, and this will really help us. Sorry for not being too sophisticated, but this is really issue number one.
No, absolutely, yeah. And Mattia?
Yeah, the opening of the cluster is the most important politically, but I would add, if you ask me for one thing, practically, it is the implementation of the audit recommendations of the NABU SAPO, which sounds very technical, but in one sentence, NABU is asking for access to independent forensics, and 2019, the law was adopted for surveillance equipment. These are two examples of steps that they need to continue their work even better. So this I would push for and asking for with the Ukrainian government.
Thank you. That's also an excellent recommendation. We've run out of time, so I need to close this discussion. I think it's been a fascinating discussion, very insightful. I think we've gone into all the nooks and crannies of all the challenges Ukraine faces in terms of the anti-corruption agenda, but many more. And I see there's a huge amount of, as always, energy and determination from Ukrainian civil society to keep pushing this along at almost any cost. And we need to remember that this is going on amid the full-scale invasion, which makes the job more difficult. But you see Ukraine is committed to its EU accession path, which is true, but also to being a corruption-free, strong rule of law country. I mean, first and foremost. So I congratulate you for all your hard efforts. I do hope that we'll see a continued approach from the European institutions to keep the whip cracking on the things that need to be done and done quickly, so that we don't see any more backtracking. But I feel that there have been important lessons learned from what happened in July, and this is a good thing. From the side of EPC, within our European Future program, we will continue to follow Ukraine very closely. I mean, we basically cover everything from security issues to the EU accession to the stolen Ukrainian children. So please keep an eye on our website for future events and publications. And thank you very much for coming and joining us today. And I hope that you will take what you've learned today from our great speakers and spread the message around, because this is also important. Ukraine is not the most corrupt country in the world, which is still what is often put out there. It's done amazing things and much more can be done. So thank you all and have a good afternoon.